How do we deal with irrational fear? Well, first of all, we realize it's irrational. If I really, really deeply in the cells of my being know that something is irrational, I'm not going to be afraid of it. So you cannot, there's actually a whole study in psychology about phobia, and you cannot give people phobias of a lot of things. It's not that you can develop a phobia of just about anything. If I really know that something is irrational, I will not be afraid of it. So for example, if I am afraid of getting malaria, let's just come up with something. If I'm afraid of getting malaria, and I hire the most toxic, horrible, deadly companies to come and spray horrible, toxic, deadly, DDT and chemicals in my house so that there's no mosquitoes at all. And I know that there's no mosquitoes because my dog died, my cat died. I mean, everything that was alive in that house died because the chemicals are so deadly, nothing is still alive in my house. Well, I'm no longer going to be afraid of getting malaria because I know I have just killed not only the mosquitoes that could have given it to me, but I've killed everything. So my fear would be gone. The place that fear exists is when on some level I actually think something's going to happen. Or could happen. If something is impossible to happen. I mean, if I'm lying on the ground, let's take a better example than my malaria example. If I'm lying on the ground, you cannot generate a fear of falling in me. Right? I'm already lying on the ground. Where am I going to go? Or if I'm sitting here on the couch, a foot above the ground, you could not generate in me a fear of falling, because even if I did fall, what I would know is I would land on my bum, nothing's going to happen, I'm a foot above the ground. But take me to the top of the Empire State Building, and you could absolutely generate a fear of falling in me. Put me on a rooftop, you could generate a fear of falling in me, because it's possible. So, in order for there to be fear, there has to be some part of me that believes that it is possible. So when we say an irrational fear, the first part is, well, how can I take that awareness of the fact that it's irrational and get it from just the outermost layer of my brain deep into my being? Because the minute it gets deep in my being, my fear will dissipate. That's part one. But part two is faith. Really faith. There's a beautiful, beautiful story of Swami Vivekananda that I love, where he was always emphasizing to his disciples, be fearless, be fearless, be fearless. And one day his disciples decided to test him. And he was giving a lecture, and they stormed the lecture hall, dressed up in masks and outfits of bandits, and they've got guns that look real, but of course they're fake, and they start firing these fake guns. Everybody in the audience has no idea it's a joke, so they start to scream and run and do whatever people do when they're afraid. They run out the door, they get under chairs, they fall on the ground. But Swamiji keeps giving his lecture. And at the end of it, finally, they come up and they fall at his feet and they bow down and they say, Swamiji, how could you do it? How is it possible? Here there were guns. We were shooting. How could you keep giving a lecture? And he said, because... They said, did you know that the guns were fake? He said, no, but that's not the point. He said, the bullet that is meant to take my life will take it even if I'm surrounded by 100 guards. And the bullet which is not meant to take my life will not take it even if fired at point blank range. And so that faith, that awareness that I'm being taken care of, that doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen. It doesn't mean I'm going to get every job that I wanted. It doesn't mean I'm always going to be healthy. It doesn't mean that people I love aren't going to die or leave me. But it means that on the core foundational level, I'm being taken care of. And there is nothing to fear. When I was very, very young, maybe a year and a half, 2, we were at a gas station in LA getting gas. And I don't remember it vividly. I was very, very young. But what I remember was my mom was out of the car getting gas, and suddenly you heard shots fired. And I heard lots and lots of people screaming. And my mom came and scooped me up and held me in her arms, and we ran like around the side of the, gas station building. And then it was over. And that's all I remember about the event, because clearly nobody, gave me the news and the details later on. But the distinct experience of hearing people scream, of knowing that there was some problem going on, that anxiety, and then being in the mother's arms, even though shots were still firing, even though people were still screaming, the fear's gone. And this is true for all children. We see it all the time. The minute they're in the mother's arms, they may fall, they're scared, they're hurt, they cry, mom picks them up. They may still be bloody, they may still need a bandage, but that fear is gone. And when we can live with the real awareness that we're in the mother's arms, in the divine's arms, then fear dissipates. Like a child's fear dissipates in his mother's arms, so our fear about life should dissipate when we realize that we're in the divine's arms. And again, that doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. But it means that we're being carried by the divine, and things are going to be as they should be. I'll end by sharing a very quick story about Puja Swamiji, which is one of my favorite stories about fear. He was on an airplane, true story, he was on an airplane and in the United States, and they were flying over Chicago, or into Chicago or out of Chicago, but the Chicago area inevitably is always full of storms, and this particular day there were very, very, very heavy storms. And the plane was literally rocking, and at one point the plane plummeted about 1,000 feet. And the pilot came on and actually told everybody to take crash positions, that it was very possible he was going to have to make a crash landing. People are screaming. The overhead bins are open, bags are falling out, people are holding their loved ones. And Puja Swamiji is writing. He's writing on a pad on his, table. Now the story was told to me by the man who was traveling with him, who was the chief editor of our Encyclopedia of Hinduism project. And so Swamiji is writing. And Dr. Rao says to him, "What are you writing, Swamiji?" And at that moment, then the plane plummeted another 1,000 feet. More stuff came out of the overhead bins. Again, people were screaming and screaming and crying, and the pilot again is saying, please stay in crash positions. You know, we're very likely going to have to make a crash landing. And again, Swamiji's still writing. And this chief editor says to him, Swamiji, for God's sakes, get into crash position. What are you writing? And Swamiji says, I'm writing my speech. And Dr. Rao says, Swamiji, speech? What speech? There's not going to be any speech. We're all going to die. And Swamiji says, well, see, I know that I'm not going to die. And since everybody else is convinced they're going to die, it means I'm going to be the only survivor of this plane wreck. And if I'm the only survivor of this plane wreck, naturally they're going to want to take my interview. And he said, my English isn't so good. And so I thought that as long as I still had you alive sitting next to me, I should figure out my speech so that I could ask you any questions that I might have of how to say something in English. So I love that story because it's such an incredible example of what's possible. Not necessarily something that all of us can think about striving for or attaining. I mean, when the pilot says take crash positions, we're going to crash, most of us. But to show what's possible, when you're that connected, to what's about to happen, so that's another point, but of being in the arms of the mother, that there's no fear. So whether she's bouncing you like this, or she's bouncing you like this, or she's, bouncing you like this, in the mother's arms, it doesn't matter. Because you're being cradled and taken care of either way. And so the irrational fear gets treated by the rational mind, really, really showing it how irrational that is, which is able to then seep into the truth of our being when we really believe it, and by the devoted heart and the devoted spirit of knowing that we're in the hands of the divine.